Presidential elections are always about conflict and competition, but this year's version was much more like a crisis response. If there was little surprise about the results from Massachusetts, there was still a good deal of urgency around getting out the vote or getting it in by mail. To tell us that part of the story is the president of the Young Democrats of Massachusetts, Lezlie Braxton Campbell. Thank you very much for being with us, Lezlie.
Thank you for having me again, Chris.
Leslie, I want to start with the usual convention in news with what's happened last. I imagine you were up pretty late last night. Tell us, what was that like and what were you focusing on?
Yeah, so was up actually like to the wee hours of the morning, just tracking races on a national level and on a local level. So I'm starting off here. We endorsed some candidates as YDMA in some really tough races, and some of those candidates won, some of them didn't. One that did win re-election was Representative Tram Nguyen. So congratulations to her. Meg Wheeler did not win, unfortunately. And also we endorsed Will LaRose, and he did not win as well. Those are just some of like the top races we were focusing on. And so we were hoping to see better outcomes and we didn't, but we're optimistic still for the future.
Tell me a little about the race with Representative Trump, because I think there was some conflict going on there. How did that work out?
Yeah, so I know that in that race, like I believe there was a racist robocall that targeted voters in her district, and it was like a really tough re-election race. I want to thank our AAPI caucus that really took the lead on getting her in terms of supporting her and helping her get reelected from our standpoint. I know there are many people outside of YDMA that helped in that race, but one of our caucuses really took the lead on that, and so I want to thank them for that.
Here in Massachusetts, there was little surprise about the big statewide races, for U.S. Senator, people in Congress. Certainly here in Boston, both of the incumbents got reelected very easily. But your job with YDMA was to go out to as many people as possible and tell them it was important to vote. So to the extent you did that, what did you tell people was at stake?
So, to be dramatic, our lives, but really, just the lives of certain communities and specific communities in the country, marginalized communities, communities of color, the LGBTQ community. We had a president that is spewing out hate messages and fear mongering and blatantly disrespecting our Constitution, and just doing all of these things that are not healthy or good for our country, and disregarding science. We saw last night when he gave his speech, nobody in the room had a mask on, right? And so that there's the potential for another super spreader event again. And so we try to convey to people that it is very, very, very important that they vote in this election. And even though I know that as Democrats, that there are a lot of folks that may have been unhappy with who the nominee ended up being, but I'm trying to get them to understand the importance and what was at stake this election. And that another 4 years, and how dangerous another 4 years of the current occupant could be.
Well, when I looked at the footage of Trump's overnight announcement, and I looked at the people in the room, it was like a sort of a miniature rally. I looked at not just what was visible, but at what was invisible, the people who were not there and what was not mentioned as far as problems. What do you take away from that?
Yeah, so people that were not there, I did notice that, and as it came on to, it's the middle of the night, and did notice, he said, well, there's the one person in the room, that brings some of the diversity, but you see, it's the same background of people, it's the same, it's family, and it seems to be, and I don't want to be name calling particularly right here, but that same white, middle-aged or white supporter, that like his base, that seemed to be in the room. And said, but what seemed to be missing in terms from him was just a real grasp on reality and what actually was going on with the election. He claimed a victory and there was no victory for him. And so, and then at the same time, claim that we're trying to steal the election, and nobody's trying to steal the election. people did the due diligence and they voted, and we need to wait until every vote is counted before certain states and before an election is actually called, and then to even go further to say that we're already going like to the court, and just like and basically just trying to use trying to use the system to his advantage, right, instead of like what it was designed for.
Well, right now, it's quite possible that all the legitimately cast votes will be counted, and maybe Trump will lose. So, maybe that will pass with little in the way of disturbances. But are you worried that it's not going to be as good as that?
I am, I'll tell you like what I'm worried about. And yes, I'm worried about him like winning re-election, but I'm also just worried about like where we go as a country like after this, right? So one, worried that he will not accept the results, and then there will be acts of potential like violence or things around the country. But then two, worried about like I said, like where we go as a country, like are we gonna actually tackle um are we actually going to tackle the racism that's been highlighted, that is still there, that's still prevalent? Are we actually going to tackle and talk about the discrimination that's still there? Are we going to actually try to work to progress to be a more inclusive America? Or are we just going to tell people to kind of go back to the status quo of just getting along and unifying? We can't unify if people aren't respecting everybody's identity and their individuality and how they fit into America.
What about that? Because right now, even if Biden emerges as the next president and the Democrats retain control of the House, they might not have the Senate, and this is a very divided electorate nationwide. So, what about dealing with that?
you know, um, in the spirit of saying that we have to be bipartisan, we have to work across the aisle. I do believe that, but we have to work across the aisle like when it's reasonable, because as we see like right now, Democrats are fighting for things like healthcare, and racial justice. There was the policing bill that was like passed in the House, so like we are fighting for things like to make this a better America. And you have the other side that literally like you're saying no, but you're saying like no to things that are blatantly or that are obviously like that impact a certain race or certain demographic, like, right. And so I don't believe there's a compromise on that. And so does it turn into the partisan fighting that we've been having? Like, yes, it's a, but will I be proud if we're standing in our values as a party and following our platform and really working to advance that? Then yes, I will be. But just to be fighting, but not fighting for what we believe in, that's what I don't want to see.
I want to ask you about the other hat that you wear, the day job hat. You're a history teacher or a social science teacher. You work with young people who I'm sure are somewhat interested in this election cycle. What has that been like for you?
It's been amazing. It's been interesting this year. So the curriculum I teach this year is more world history and ancient history. Do still have an elective where we talk about current events. But my students have been asking me, constantly, what I think is going to happen during the election. They actually ask me who are you voting for, and I don't tell them. I say, like I'm voting for the person that I, feel will be best, and the person that is going to hopefully unify us and not drive us apart. But I can tell you, one of my students told me that she was very scared for the election. On Monday, I took the time to just go over a quick lesson about what the Electoral College is, like how it works and what to expect if they're going to watch the election last night, and what not to expect, and how we talk about that on Wednesday. But to hear a 12-year-old tell you that they're scared for their future and where this country is going, it does something to you that I really like can't explain. Like it's like you're looking at a child, and obviously this is virtually, and it's just like it's like they know that their future is at stake, and like they're worried about it, and you want to reassure them, tell them everything's going to be all right. But like honestly, I it's at the point where it's like, yes, I want to be optimistic, and I tell them, like don't worry, but you also have to be realistic too. And they're aware that everything's not okay for them, being children of color in an urban community, and like knowing like what they may or what they can face, especially with another 4 years under the current administration.
But what you're also doing is you're teaching a world perspective to students who are more focused on the here and now and maybe on social media. So how do you guide them as far as getting the story straight?
Yeah, so actually, their first unit was about primary and secondary sources, right? And so you're able like to relate that to like the current times and saying, okay, read this article and look at this, and I want you guys to tell me, and also like fact checking like what their sources are, like is this reliable, is this not reliable, and I was actually surprised to tell you a lot of my students were actually able to relate to the current time and say, oh my gosh, like Mr. doesn't, Trump do this, or like, oh my gosh, don't we see this person do this? And I'm like, yes, you're actually right. So it's like they see it and it's coming full circle and they understand. And that's why I always tell folks, don't discount or discredit our youth because they're aware of, what's going on. And they're able to, and I'm intentional about, taking that world perspective and how it relates to us like now, and like also to, letting them see like how that can relate to other places in the world, because I let them know it's like, we're not the first country to have a leader that does things like our leader does, and unfortunately, like I let them know, we won't be the last either.
Well, we should finally mention that one thing you were inspired by was a statement by the former Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm that you can't just sit there on the sidelines and let things happen. So if people want to get off the sidelines, get involved in YDMA, what's the best way for them to follow up on that?
Yes, so they can go on our website, www.ydma.org, and they can go to join us. They fill out the form and they can get involved. Obviously looking to get folks involved, especially right now with all the energy around the election, to keep pushing our values and our mission forward.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being with us
All
and
right.
taking the time. It was Lezlie Braxton Campbell from Young Democrats of Massachusetts.